Welcome back to Cinema Recaps. Today, I'll be talking about a 2004 psychological thriller mystery film titled The Village. Spoiler alert, this recap contains plot details, so consider reading with caution. The film is set in the 19th century in an isolated village deep in the woods of Pennsylvania. The story begins with the funeral of August Nicholson's son, one of the village elders. After the burial, the entire village gathers for lunch, and Elder Edward Walker offers words of comfort. As they eat, strange noises from the forest can be heard, causing Noah Percy, a developmentally disabled man, to laugh and clap excitedly. Daily life in the village is depicted through a series of scenes, showing harmony in their work. They bury anything red, send watchmen to the tower every night, and a mysterious figure wearing a red hood is seen crossing the water in the distance. One morning, when Edward arrives at the school where he teaches, he finds the children gathered in a circle outside. They've discovered the body of an animal, skinned and bloodied. The children insist that no one from the village brought it there. Edward asks who could have committed such a brutal act, and the children reply, "The ones we do not speak of, the monsters." Edward dismisses this, reminding them that the village has an agreement with these creatures. The villagers do not enter the forest, and the monsters don't enter the village. Later in the afternoon, the elders meet to discuss the upcoming festival, and Lucius Hunt, the son of Elder Alice Hunt, asks to speak. He reads aloud a letter stating that his mother is not involved in his intentions. Lucius requests permission to go beyond the woods to the neighboring towns in search of medicine. He believes that the monsters will not attack because they can sense emotions, and his intentions are pure. His request is denied. That night, Alice asks Lucius what he's thinking, and he replies that he only wants a friend. He climbs the watchtower to join Finton Coyne, the night watchman, that evening. During their conversation, Lucius asks Finton what he thinks about the towns outside the village. Finton replies that they are places full of evil people. He also thanks Lucius for being there, though he shouldn't have been on the tower. The next morning, another skinned animal is found in the village. The elders hold a meeting and reassure the villagers that it must be the work of a predator like wolves or rabid hyenas, not the ones we do not speak of. They argue that if it were them, the villagers would have noticed, as the creatures are very large. On the way home from the meeting, Edward speaks with his daughter Kitty. She tells him that she has fallen in love and wants his permission to marry. Edward is displeased because the young man hasn't properly asked for his consent. Kitty explains that she hasn't asked him yet, only that she wants her father's approval first. She reveals that the man is Lucius. Edward agrees, and Kitty runs off to confess her love to Lucius. However, Lucius rejects her, causing Kitty to return home, spending the whole evening crying in the lap of her blind sister Ivy, who comforts her by singing her to sleep. Meanwhile, Lucius brings firewood to August's house. August wonders if Lucius and his son had ever been close, as both are rather quiet. He also praises Lucius for being a kind person. On the edge of the village, a group of boys are playing a bravery challenge, standing on a tree stump with their backs to the forest and arms outstretched to see who can last the longest without feeling fear. One boy swears he hears a noise from the forest, but he still tries to stand still. Back with Lucius and August, August says that you can't run from sorrow, because it will find you, just like a dog sniffing you out. His gaze shifted to a mysterious black box in the corner. By now, the noises from the forest had scared the boys, causing them to run away. The next morning, Ivy is called to deal with Noah, who is hitting the other boys with a stick. Noah stops immediately when Ivy asks, and she leads him to look at the special house where he would be locked up if he doesn't behave. They make a deal, and Noah promises not to hit anyone again. Afterward, they decide to play by racing up the hill to the resting rock. Noah warns Ivy not to cheat, but she tricks him and runs ahead. When they reach the spot, they find Lucius already there. He shares some snacks with them, and Ivy tells him that her sister cried a lot when she was rejected. She also reveals that she can see Lucius through a faint aura that only a few people like him or her father give off. When Noah unexpectedly runs off to chase a bird, Lucius comments that Ivy runs like a boy. Ivy thanks him, then confesses that she knows why he rejected her sister. He liked her. Ivy realizes this because a few years ago, Lucius stopped touching her. When Noah returns, he jokes by placing a small frog in Ivy's hand, then takes some red berries from her pocket and places them in her hand. Ivy smiles with delight until Lucius reminds her that these are forbidden colors, things that attract the ones we do not speak of. Ivy says they should bury the berries, but Lucius is worried because he has never seen them before. Noah had them in his pocket before they arrived. Lucius asks Noah where he found them. and Noah leads him to the spot. A few hours later, Lucius presents his findings to the elders. He talks about the red berries Noah found near a drawing on the resting rock, which proves that Noah has been into the forest many times without any harm. This only strengthens Lucius's belief that the creatures in the forest won't attack him if he does the same. He continues to ask for permission to go to other towns, but the elders still refuse. That night, at home, Alice tells Lucius a story about the other towns. His father had left the village to go to the market, but a few days later, he was found robbed and left naked by the river. Alice shares this story to make Lucius understand the dangers he wants to face. However, Lucius explains that he's not doing this for himself, but for the benefit of the whole village. Lucius says he's not the one with the secret, because secrets are everywhere in the village, like the black box that Alice is holding. Alice says that the box is to help her stay safe and not forget the evils of the past. Lucius wants to open it, but Alice refuses and says they should talk to Edward. Lucius says that Edward has feelings for Alice because he never touches her. The next day, a group of boys in yellow cloaks walks along the boundary between the village and the forest, marking a yellow line on the torch post dividing the two areas. Lucius is in the group, but when everyone turns back, he doesn't follow. Instead, he walks into the forest. It doesn't take long for him to find the red berries. When he hears a growl, Lucius turns and sees a creature leaving. He decides to return to the village right after. It was already night. When Lucius returned to the village and saw Ivy standing outside the house, she told him that she had heard from her parents that Lucius wanted to leave the village to find medicine. She thought it was a noble act, but not a good idea. She also told Lucius that her sister was about to get married, which meant that now she could receive attention from anyone. We shift to the watchtower, where Finton hears a noise and opens the hatch, thinking it's Lucius, but it turns out to be a creature. After a moment of hesitation, he begins to ring the alarm to warn the entire village. Everyone rushes back to their homes to hide, while Lucius helps the villagers find a safe place. Kitty quickly takes Noah, the younger children, and Ivy into the basement, but Ivy stays at the door, waiting for Lucius. She reaches out her hand, and a creature approaching to grab her hand, but suddenly Lucius appears, grabs her hand, pulls her inside, and leads Ivy into the basement to hide with the family. The next day, red marks are discovered on the doors of all the houses. The elders hold a meeting with the villagers to try to understand what happened. The marks are clearly a warning, but the creatures had never attacked without reason. When the elders ask who knows anything, a piece of paper is handed to them. It is a confession from Lucius, admitting that he had entered the forest and was seen by the creatures. Edward arrives later, where Lucius is crying, and says that he wasn't afraid. A few days later, the villagers hold Kitty's wedding. There is plenty of food, decorations, and dancing, but also a small ritual where two men in yellow cloaks place some meat on the rocks for the creatures. When Alice congratulates Edward on his daughter's wedding, she extends her hand for a handshake, but he refuses, confirming Lucius's theory. Everyone is enjoying the party when they suddenly hear the screams of some children. The boys are brought to Edward, and when he asks what happened, they say they saw the creatures in the village, leaving warnings. They think the creatures want them to leave. The party is cancelled, and Edward orders everyone to return home together for safety. When they arrive back at the village, the scene is terrifying. The dead animals were scattered everywhere. The livestock had been taken and skinned, with their fur and hides gone. There were marks on the barn doors that were too high for a wolf to have made. This left the elders in a state of confusion. That night, Ivy was awakened in the middle of the night and went outside, where she found Lucius sitting on her porch. She sat beside him and mentioned that there would be an investigation the next day to figure out how the boundary had been breached. Lucius wanted her to go inside because it was cold and unsafe, but Ivy changed the subject. She asked if Lucius thought of her as a tomboy, then brought up the bravery game that Lucius held the record for. She asked him how he could be so brave, and Lucius replied that he'd just focused on what needed to be done. She then asked if he would dance with her on their wedding night, and why he couldn't express his emotions more. Lucius grew a little frustrated, and said that if he wanted to say something, he would, and if he wanted to dance with her, he would ask. He also admitted that sometimes he was afraid, especially when thinking about Ivy getting hurt, which was why he was sitting on her porch, worrying about her safety more than anyone else. Eventually, he agreed to dance with her on their wedding night, and they kissed. The next day, during the investigation, one of the villagers asked Alice if the rumors about Ivy and Lucius were true. and Alice confirmed it. At the same time, Ivy asked her sister for permission to pursue a relationship with Lucius, as she didn't want to hurt Kitty and still saw her sister as more important than any boy. Kitty blessed the couple and wished them happiness. As the two sisters talked, Lucius received a visit from Noah, who was clearly upset by the news. Lucius knew that Noah also had feelings for Ivy, but he wasn't allowed to say much before Noah stabbed him twice. The scene shifted to the Percy family's house, where Noah arrived home, his body covered in blood, calling it the bad color. The elders were immediately informed of the accident and ordered everyone in the village to begin searching for the injured person. When Ivy heard that Noah was the one who caused the incident, she guessed who the injured person might be and rushed to Lucius's house. Ivy found Lucius unconscious on the floor and sat down to hold him. When Edward arrived, she told him that she couldn't see Lucius's colors anymore. A few hours later, an elder announced to the villagers that Lucius was still alive, but might pass at any time, so everyone should pray for him. Ivy felt angered when she heard this. Ivy went to visit Noah, who was locked in the house, and slapped him repeatedly. Noah's father had to pull her away using force. Noah was locked up again, and the sound of crying and pounding echoed as he was left alone. A while later, Ivy spoke to her father and said that if Lucius died, she would die with him. She asked her father for permission to go to the towns in search of medicine. The scene shifted to Edward talking to the doctor to learn more about Lucius's condition before making a decision. The doctor explained that Lucius had an infection and could only be prayed for. Edward urged the doctor to give a better answer about what could be done if they had more resources. The doctor admitted that Lucius would have a much better chance of surviving if they could control the infection. Alice took Edward aside to talk privately, sensing what he was thinking and reminding him of the vow he must uphold, just like the other elders. Edward didn't listen, and when Alice began to cry, he embraced her. Edward returned to Ivy and took her for a walk, telling her that his father was very good at business, but that was dangerous because money was evil and it could change a person's heart. That's why there was no money in the village. He then told her that Ivy's grandfather had been shot in the head while he was sleeping. Edward told Ivy all of this so she could understand what he was about to show her. They arrived at an old, unused storage shed, and he asked her to try not to scream as he led her inside. The next scene shows Ivy preparing a bag for her journey and telling Lucius that she's going out to fetch medicine for him. Meanwhile, Edward meets with the elders to inform them of this plan. Back with Ivy, she stands at the village boundary, wearing a yellow cloak. Finton and Kristoff join her, also in yellow cloaks. They move closer to the forest, and Ivy raises her hand to show the small bag she is holding before the three step into the woods. After walking a few steps, Finton stops and tells Ivy that Kristoff won't be following them anymore. Ivy reassures Kristoff that they don't need to be afraid, because they have the magical stones. Kristoff wonders why they had never heard of these stones before. Finton pleads with him not to leave them, but Kristoff believes it is too dangerous and decides to return to the village. A few hours later, as they wait for the rain to stop, Finton hears something in the forest and panics. He decides to turn back, leaving Ivy alone, crying. She drops the magical stones onto the ground, and a flashback begins, recounting what happened in the shed. Inside the shed, Ivy thought there was a monster, but it was just some costumes. Edward explained that it had all been a lie. There had been rumors about creatures living in the forest, which he had taught about in books when he was in the towns. The screams in the forest, the ritual meat offerings, the furless animal carcasses, and the drilling tools, all were part of the elders' charade, a plan to keep everyone away from the woods. Their existence wasn't meant to harm, but the situation with Lucius had gone too far, so he had to make an exception for Ivy. Edward gave Ivy a pocket watch and a piece of paper with the names of the medicines she needed to fetch, along with instructions on how to navigate the forest and reach the towns. She was not to tell anyone outside of the village about it. Edward then visited Alice and told her that he'd send Ivy to the town, as that was all he could do for her. At the elders' meeting, they were not pleased with Edward's decision and accused him of jeopardizing everything they had built. Edward reminded them that they had built the village to bring hope, and he couldn't bear to lose another elder's child. He also reminded them that they couldn't live forever, and that Ivy and Lucius were the perfect candidates to replace them one day. In the end, August agreed and said that everyone would allow Ivy to go. Back in the present, Ivy continued her journey through the forest. Unable to see the ground, she fell into a hole, but was able to save herself by grabbing onto a tree branch and climbing out. She rested for a moment beside a fallen tree before continuing her walk. She hadn't gone far before she heard a noise. After throwing a branch towards the sound, it grew louder and she started to run. She stopped in the middle of a field of red berries, and a growl made her turn around. A monster was behind her. She told herself it wasn't real, but the creature kept chasing her. She kept running until she crashed into the fallen tree from earlier, and an idea came to her. She stood still, spreading her arms, mimicking the game the boys in the village played on the tree trunk. As the creature lunged to catch her, Ivy stepped aside, causing the monster to fall into the hole. Meanwhile, the Percy family visited Noah's house but found no trace of him inside. What they discovered was an empty hole in the floor, indicating that Noah had found the hidden monster costume and fled with it. Back at the hole, the mascot costume was found, and it became clear that Noah had been the one chasing Ivy. He died in that hole. Ivy kept walking until she found a path. She left her cloak and bag on the ground and hurried down the path, eventually encountering a tall wall. She climbed over it and finally made her way out of the forest, escaping the wilderness. Back in the village, the elders opened black boxes to reflect on the past and the reasons they created the village. They had once lived in the city and were all victims of violence. They met in a grief counseling room, and Edward recruited them to create a place where they would be protected from the outside world. A group photo that Edward was looking at revealed an important detail. This wasn't the 19th century, but the 21st century. Back with Ivy, after climbing over the wall, a Jeep with the Walker Wildlife Sanctuary logo pulled up beside her. A security guard named Kevin stepped out, looking at Ivy as an intruder, and told her she wasn't allowed there. Ivy explained that she came from the forest, which Kevin found hard to believe, and she asked for his help. She handed him the list of medicines and the pocket watch as payment. Upon realizing someone was injured, Kevin agreed to help since the medicines were available in the guardhouse. Ivy was surprised by his kindness, not expecting an outsider to treat her this way. Kevin went back to the vehicle and drove to the guardhouse, where his superior greeted him with some advice. He reminded Kevin that the job was easy. Just keep outsiders away from the wildlife sanctuary and avoid disturbing the forest. Kevin shouldn't engage with any intruders. His only job was to patrol. The superior also recalled when planes were paid to avoid flying over this area a few years ago, as the press had created enough tension for him. When the man returned to read the newspaper, Kevin secretly grabbed some medical supplies and borrowed a maintenance ladder. Soon after, news of Ivy returning with the medicine reached the elders, who were waiting by Lucius's bedside. They were also told that Ivy had been attacked by a creature, which she had killed, causing Noah's parents great sorrow. Edward assured them they would find Noah and give him a proper burial, telling everyone that it was a creature responsible for the incident. Noah's sacrifice had made the stories real, and gave them the chance to continue maintaining the village, if that was what the elders wanted. They all agreed with the plan. The film ended with Ivy entering the room, taking Lucius's hand, and telling him that she had returned. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch more exciting videos.